What's the psychology of why childhood fame is so destructive? As you all know, there's no safer path for your child than to make them a child star. Okay, maybe not at all. We're gonna break down the curious psychology from the docu-series Quiet on Set to finally reveal why childhood fame is often so destructive. Now, let's get started.
In the 90s and 2000s, there was one producer who was able to take Nickelodeon to new heights.
Dan Schneider!
Nickelodeon's golden boy.
Dan saw her and immediately knew she'd be a star.
Hi everyone, it's me, Amanda.
Amanda Bynes' parents were very hands-on with her career, specifically her dad.
Treated her like a wind-up doll. A lot of pressure and high expectations.
When a parent pushes their child to become a star performer, it causes high levels of stress from their parents and bosses from a young age. They may experience identity confusion where they perceive their complete identity and value from performing, since that's all they really know from their entire time on this planet. Therefore, what do you think happens when they become older and have a difficult time getting performance roles? Yes, they can easily feel extremely anxious and slip into severe depressive episodes because they begin to devalue themselves, since their complete identity and self-value came from performing. Also, especially when a parent pushes a child to perform, even if the child initially enjoyed performing, the child will slowly begin to resent their parent due to their loss of autonomy, where they begin to feel trapped.
Amanda and her parents were not getting along.
Thus leading to feelings of frustration and resistance, ultimately resulting in rebellion against their parents.
Because of Dan's involvement in this plan to emancipate Amanda, this creates this huge split.
And many parents who push their children to become child performers use their children as proxies to boost their self-esteem.
Thank you! Oh my gosh, I'm so excited! Okay, I want to say thank you to Nickelodeon, Brian Robbins, Dan Schneider.
The Amanda Show is on Nickelodeon.
She was giving interviews, she was on talk shows, everywhere.
It's really astounding that Amanda Bynes was one of the most famous child stars in the world. However, now she's humbly painting nails.
Hey everybody, I wanted to let my fans know that I'm taking the board exam to get my manicurist license this Tuesday. I really hope I pass the test this time. I will let you all know if I do or don't, of course, and I'll keep retaking it until I get the license. I hope everybody has a great day. Bye.
There's of course nothing wrong with painting nails, but it's such an incredible story.
We had fans coming and wanting to see us every episode. As a 12-year-old girl, I was over the moon. I was so excited. We'd be out and people would say, oh my goodness, you're that girl on the Amanda Show.
Experiencing that massive fame is actually very psychologically damaging to a child, and can be best explained with these lyrics in Britney's Lucky song.
And she keeps on winning, but tell me what happens when it stops.
That part is a little bit of a double entendre to both get back into the chorus of the song, but also implying that fame feels very empty and transactional.
What happens when it stops?
Because when you stop winning, all those people who love you so much leave you, thereby inevitably making you feel worthless. When you get a burst of fame, family and friends are blowing up your phone. People are recognizing you in public. Fans are sending you messages of how much they love you. But when you're not winning anymore, it all becomes very sad and lonely, and you quickly realize that all the love you received was very superficial, which explains the psychology of why Lucky cries at night. Massive fame and fortune have turned all the love that she gets into something very fleeting, superficial, and transactional, thereby feeling that no one ever truly loves her. Some adults can process this type of fame effectively. However, imagine going through that as a child. Yes, it's extremely psychologically damaging to them because their cognition, perception, and emotions are in their early stages of development in their prefrontal cortex. And their prefrontal cortex is even still finishing its development into their early 20s. Therefore, the child can't effectively process these very complex psychosocial dynamics to effectively understand why everyone says they love them one day, but many of those same people just ignore them the next. Thus, this many times causes irreversible psychological damage to their understanding of love, skews their feelings of attachment, and may even contribute to their development of borderline personality disorder as they get older.
I definitely saw Amanda being very close physically with Dan. There were many times that I saw Amanda sitting behind him, hugging him, giving him like a neck massage.
In the docu-series, they claim they don't have any direct evidence that Dan Schneider did anything illegal with Amanda Bynes, although he clearly acted inappropriate with her. What do you think?
The hot tub scene, though, I thought was always a little odd.
I am the executive producer and I'm the head writer.
You actually wrote the words you're saying to each other right now?
Yes, I actually wrote this whole conversation that we're having right now.
Now watch this part of a recent interview with Dan Schneider, who seems to be trying to garner sympathy from the audience after this docuseries was released, and see if you think he's authentic.
Dan, I'm not good with words like you are, and would you help me with my speech for the judge? And I said, of course, and I did. And he ended up going to prison and serving his time. And yeah, that was probably the darkest part of my career.
Yes, his emotions change extremely quickly, going from not crying to crying, right back to suddenly not crying again.
Darkest part of my career.
Therefore indicating possible inauthenticity, trying to garner sympathy from the audience of how nice he was to have helped Drake's mother write a letter to the judge when he was sentenced for his own crimes, which we'll discuss soon.
He became a worse and worse person to work for.
He could literally be nice and then mean and then nice and then mean, like throughout the day. One minute I'm like, I've got Dan wrong. He's really nice. He's supportive. And then like an hour later, I could be like, this guy's scary as hell.
Have you ever met someone like that? Many think those quick shifts in mood are a clear sign that someone has bipolar disorder. However, that's a common misperception in psychology. Instead, it's more likely the person has borderline personality disorder due to their emotional dysregulation.
Working for Dan was like being in an abusive relationship. It could be very volatile and could turn any moment.
Dan was also a child performer. And as we said earlier, that constant fleeting love and feelings of abandonment which performers constantly experience may contribute to the development of borderline personality disorder. Yes, borderline is very common in performers, and that can easily be a separate video all in itself, because those who are ordinarily more susceptible to borderline will be more attracted to performing, and the emotional roller coaster of performing can easily contribute to borderline. That's right, it becomes a double whammy effect in Hollywood.
I wanted to be an actress when I was young, so I had some resentment over that.
This is very common for parents who always wanted to perform and be famous, so they thereby want fame for their children to live vicariously through them. In psychology, this is what's called parental projection, where they subconsciously put their own unfulfilled ambitions onto their children. Many parents innocently can't help but to do this. If you can, ask your parents what they always wanted to be but never became, such as an athlete, doctor, lawyer, singer, dancer, and you may find that you spent your childhood or even your adulthood chasing after your parents' dreams.
We as parents were not allowed back on the set. We were greeted by a production assistant, Jason Handy, who guided all the kids to where they need to be. Jason wants to email. I thought, oh, this is going well. I was so happy I was the parent that could give my child what she wanted in life.
In psychosocial dynamics with familial relationships, it's not uncommon for parents to unwittingly project their own desires and aspirations onto their children. And over time, this projection can become so ingrained that the child actually internalizes these desires as their own due to parental influence and the persistent development of a child's self-perception and aspirations. In other words, the child thinks it was their dream, but in reality, it was their parents' dream all along.
A couple months later, she was sitting at the computer and got up and ran into her bedroom. She said, I got an email from Jason. It was a picture of him
while also in the photo doing a lewd act. You may be asking, how is she not suspicious that something like this would happen? Yes, you guessed it, we can answer this through psychology. Trusting of authority figures, trusting the brand image and reputation of Nickelodeon, cognitive dissonance, optimism bias, and the endowment effect, where because she was excited that she felt that she was giving her daughter something wonderful,
I was the parent that could give my child what she wanted in life.
She inherently became less critical of the negative possibilities associated with that gift.
I went back and forth with, should I call the police?
Yes, she should. But why do you think it's so important to call the police if something like that happens?
They're going to think I'm a bad parent. All I can do is make sure I keep her far away from him.
Not reporting that is a really bad idea. But why? Right, something physical could have been done to her daughter, and she could have also prevented it from happening to other children. Also, as much as a parent may not want to know what happened to their child, they need to know what happened so they can best get them psychological and medical care. I call this the ostrich effect of a parent sticking their head in the sand to ignore a negative issue. This is where parents superficially tend to ignore or avoid negative or threatening information pertaining to their children because it causes too much pain, fear, and anxiety, so they just pretend it doesn't exist. It's a pretty hilarious concept that the ostrich is such a huge bird but thinks it's doing a good job at hiding as long as it can't see. But that's the whole idea of this concept. Just because you superficially ignore the danger doesn't mean that the danger has magically become non-existent.
The public still has this image of Hollywood, of this glitz and glam, and they don't know what these kids went through.
Guess what percentage of Hollywood had something like that in general happen to them? 30%? 50%? 75%? No, 94%! And as we will discuss soon, it's also sadly passed down in a cycle from one generation of Hollywood to the next generation, so it will effectively sadly continue in Hollywood forever.
We'd like to speak with Brandy about Jason Handy. Are you familiar with that name?
Over 10,000 images of children.
We found a Ziploc bag and there were letters from her.
And of course, her child wasn't the only one who he did that to. Whenever something like that happens, it's critical to promptly seek therapy from a trained professional to help address and mitigate the profound psychological impact those crimes have on the victim.
4 months later, another member of the crew was arrested.
Wait, 2 pedophiles? What is that? What is that?
When bank robber Willie Sutton was once asked by police, "Why did you only rob banks?" do you know what he said with a confused look on his face? Because that's where the money is. And in Hollywood, why would that type of person work on a kid's show? Yeah, you get the idea. But of course, not every adult who works on a kid's show was like that. However, that type of criminal would gravitate towards those shows. There's a saying that I often think of when I go through these cases. Bad people ruin good things for good people.
Pickle Boy likes to hurt and tease pickles.
We were there for so many hours. You get comfortable with people.
In psychology, what she's describing is normalization of deviance. This occurs when people become accustomed to deviations from standard practices or norms over time, to the point where they no longer perceive these deviations as problematic or abnormal. This can happen gradually as people become desensitized to red flags due to repeated exposure or familiarity with a situation or individual.
A painting in the room of a birthday clown holding balloons. Brian got very excited when I asked him about it. To Brian, I hope you enjoy the painting. Best wishes, your friend, John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah, the dialogue coach on the kids' TV show All That was friends with the serial killer John Wayne Gacy, who killed 33 young men and buried them under his house.
Brian actually developed a pen pal relationship with John. He kept this pile of letters and photos from John Wayne Gacy in his nightstand next to his bed.
Here's a helpful tip. If you ever meet someone who is a fan of a serial killer, run! Right, it's because they are likely living vicariously through them and maybe dreaming of doing similar crimes, but don't want to get caught and do the time. Therefore, it may only be a short while until they build the sick courage and plan to do those similar crimes themselves, such as with the accused Idaho 4 murderer Brian Kohberger.
Your instinct is to give someone the benefit of the doubt if you've known them for that long, even in the face of this really bad sign.
Yes, he seems to be referring to what's called cognitive dissonance, where the discomfort of having conflicting beliefs about a person causes them to reduce this discomfort by modifying their beliefs to align and rationalize the discrepancy. Given their positive feelings towards Brian stemming from their shared experiences working on the show, they were motivated to minimize and rationalize the significance of these warning signs in order to maintain their existing positive belief in Brian's character. This psychological phenomenon is akin to how outsiders may more readily identify red flags in your romantic partner, as they lack the emotional investment assessment that clouds judgment, allowing them to perceive warning signs more objectively.
This man who is like trusted as basically a supervisor of kids is not safe.
That former child actor touches on another interesting concept, which is called deference to authority, where people are more likely to trust authority, a known brand, and assume systems and processes. Many trusted the hiring process and assumed Nickelodeon was doing the proper background checks to prevent someone like Brian from working with children. This trust in the system led to a false sense of security and a lack of suspicion of Brian. Also, keep in mind, this was not a backyard company. This was Nickelodeon. And many assumed that they wouldn't hire someone who was dangerous to children to work with children.
My name is Drake Bell. Brian and I became really close. A lot of the same interests. Looking back, I think that was probably a little calculated.
Yes, that was likely calculated because that's what's called grooming behavior, and we'll sadly notice more of that as we continue.
I was always within eye distance, somewhere where I could always keep my eyes on Drake. And unfortunately, I started seeing Brian start to just hang around Drake too much.
That close proximity behavior is very common for someone who is physically interested in another, and Drake's father was very suspicious of Brian Peck. However, a big part of their grooming process is sadly isolation, which we'll notice soon.
What are you doing? Drake can put that on himself, put his arm around his waist, put his hand up on his shoulder and kind of run it down his arm. And this would happen routinely.
That is a major red flag and indicates grooming behavior where Brian was attempting to get Drake to psychologically feel used to his closeness and physicality. And Drake's father was spot on with his concerns.
I saw this video of Brian Peck on Growing Pains with Leonardo DiCaprio, grabbing his shoulder, running across him and going down his arm. That's the kind of behavior I saw him with my son.
Now it probably makes you wonder, did Brian do the same things he did to Drake to Leonardo DiCaprio too?
I don't have a good feeling. And she goes, oh, well, I don't know if you knew it or not, but he's gay. Maybe you're just homophobic and you just don't understand he's a touchy-feely guy.
False. That has nothing to do with it. For example, if an adult woman was doing the same thing to your young son, you would probably still have issue with it. Sexual preference has nothing to do with inappropriate touching. However, the staff was probably friends with Brian and could not think that their friend was up to no good due to their cognitive dissonance. This is the psychological discomfort when a person feels conflicting beliefs, attitudes, or values. To reduce this discomfort, a person may modify their understanding of their friend's actions to align the discrepancy by using denial, rationalization, minimization, selective attention, and reinterpretation. In other words, we naturally don't like when things don't make sense. Therefore, we subconsciously distort reality to simplify and make sense of our world, biasly favoring what we already know and want to believe.
In hindsight, I should have been able to see, but as a kid, you have no clue.
Basically, children don't have the life experience to know the red flags of what to look out for, and they often trust that the adults they know are not going to do anything that would harm them. Also, many times the attention they get from the adults may make them feel special.
But my dad saw it a mile away.
Therefore, it is up to us adults around the child to recognize those initial grooming behaviors and to stop it from progressing.
Who pops up? Brian Peck. Who pops up? Brian's friends. And they're following Drake all through the Strawberry Festival. And I'm just going, what is this?
I think Brian got a sense that my dad was on the watch. And so he started to really drive a wedge between my dad and me.
They may first try and build trust of the suspicious adult, and if that doesn't work, they may sadly attempt to eliminate the adult from the child's life so they can have unfettered access to that child. Attempting to isolate them from the suspicious party is a major grooming behavior to watch out for.
Coming from someone like Brian, I was believing it because he's been in this business for so long and he must know more than us. Started getting into my mom's mind. It was like an army against my dad.
Phone call from his mom saying Drake doesn't want you to be his manager anymore.
And that was apparently all Brian's doing so he can sadly have full access to Drake. It would not surprise me if Brian also became good friends with Drake's mom, not only to remove Drake's dad, but for Drake's mom to trust Brian so Brian could sadly achieve his desired access to Drake.
Say, hey, me and my friends are going to Disneyland. Brian would come and pick me up for auditions. Worked his way into every aspect of my life. Everything changed with Brian one morning. I knew that my life was going to be absolutely, completely different from that point on.
It's very sad. Personally, I would never let any adult be alone with my child. And if they had to be alone, there better be security cameras. As you can imagine, in my field, I know too much about what could happen and how detrimental it is for a child if it were to happen, which we'll discuss more about that soon.
Somehow ended up back at Brian's house. It just got worse and worse.
What Drake is sadly discussing is what's called escalation. They may apologize.
He's so apologetic. Oh, this will never happen again. I'm so sorry. You know, that I don't know what got into me.
But it usually sadly gets worse and worse and worse.
I didn't know how to process it. Led to a lot of self-destruction, alcohol abuse, substance abuse.
But why is that the case? It's a psychological coping mechanism to the trauma response of feeling fear, shame, guilt, and powerlessness. Therefore, alcohol and drugs are often used as self-medication to alleviate anxiety, depression, nightmares, and flashbacks. Alcohol and substance use may become ingrained as maladaptive coping patterns that victims rely on to manage their emotions. These patterns may persist into adulthood even after the immediate trauma has subsided.
There was no therapy and was left to my own devices, which at that age probably isn't the best thing.
It's really a sad story. He was all alone in this and didn't know how else to cope with his trauma, so he self-medicated because he didn't know how else to make the pain he was experiencing go away.
I didn't need to have dogs lick the peanut butter off. Jack didn't need to be submerged in a pool of worms. Having to watch your fellow castmates tortured.
Yes, doing those challenges as a child often feels like torture, but it doesn't feel as much like torture as an adult in TV shows like Fear Factor.
People are brought here from all around the country for one reason: stare fear in the eye and compete to win $50,000.
And yes, that was when Joe Rogan had hair. Do you know why that's the case? Why it may feel like torture for a child, but maybe not adults? It's because children are doing those challenges upon the direction, trust, supervision, and encouragement from adults, and children are inherently at a massive power disadvantage, lacking the understanding, capacity, and capability to properly decline. When an adult doesn't want to do a fear challenge, they know they can quit at any time. However, when a child does a fear challenge like this by the direction of adults, they feel forced into it. When an adult does a fear challenge, they get paid. They know they are doing the challenge for money. When a child does one of those fear challenges, the parent gets paid for the child going through that. And hopefully the parent doesn't pocket all the money for themselves. Also, children's brains are still developing, and their cognitive abilities, emotional regulation skills, and understanding of risk and danger are not fully developed. As a result, they have difficulty processing and even coping with fear-inducing experiences, leading to heightened distress and vulnerability, even possibly developing PTSD. Younger children are more likely to laugh with a laugh track because they are highly influenced by social cues. When they hear others laughing, whether it's real or simulated through a laugh track, they are psychologically more inclined to join in and laugh as well, even if they don't fully understand the joke. Therefore, Nickelodeon basically found out that younger children will laugh at virtually anything if a laugh track is there.
Dan Schneider is obsessed with feet.
Check this out.
Strange things amuse Dan, and that was just one of the things he thought was funny.
So the real question is why the adult humor if they were going to laugh and be entertained by anything?
It's so cool!
Want to get slapped with a sausage?
There's a joke about being on the wood.
My character can't get it open, squirting onto Jamie's face.
I think Dan Schneider wanted to be personally entertained by his own perverted comedy, and there was probably also something else behind it too. But why do you think Dan Schneider constantly made suggestive humor?
I'm thirsty. Give up the juice.
The tortured genius. If a guy's a total piece of he must be so good at his job.
Have you ever heard of the tortured genius theory? It suggests that creative people, such as artists, writers, or musicians, may experience heightened emotional intensity or psychological distress, which fuels their creative output. This suggests that suffering trauma or mental illness may be intertwined with creativity. I personally think Dan Schneider was less of a creative genius and just a sick man.
A lot of my self-worth was deeply damaged.
Yes, child acting can damage a child's self-worth because of the massive amounts of rejection and superficial criticism they constantly receive, pressure to perform, loss of a childhood, loss of self-identity from playing and being known publicly as different characters, public scrutiny and bullying, potential abuse, and feeling inadequate when inevitably transitioning from a child actor to an adult actor. Additionally, performing is not one of those jobs where you can just work harder and reach your goals, because much of it is completely outside of your direct control, which thereby creates feelings of powerlessness, triggering feelings of depression, anxiety, and helplessness.
Everyone is replaceable. It sent me down a really dark path.
There's a dark underbelly to child stardom. Children are just a dollar sign when they show up on set.
This psychologically impacts a child's self-worth and self-identity by being thrown into the capitalistic system from such a young age to feel like they're just a number and a means for their boss to make money. And yes, most people will eventually eventually experience that feeling at some point in their life. But young children have not fully cognitively developed their emotional resilience to those feelings, therefore causing the child to take those feelings much harder than adults and thereby potentially emotionally scarring them for life.
The alcoholism that I've dealt with, leaving the industry and not being able to maintain the success that I had.
Transitioning from child actor to adult actor and struggling to achieve previous levels of success can be psychologically damaging due to loss of identity, pressure to succeed, and constant comparison to past achievements. Child actors may face heightened expectations from themselves, their families, and the public, contributing to their anxiety and despair. The loss of privileges and opportunities, coupled with the inability to sustain previous levels of fame that is completely outside of their control, can exacerbate feelings of failure and helplessness.
I was burned out. They don't have childhoods like kids are supposed to have.
Why do you think this is psychologically damaging? Yes, it can stunt a child's social development. Child actors may struggle to form a strong sense of identity outside of their on-screen personas and may experience high levels of stress and anxiety. Isolation from peers and exposure to adult themes can lead to a loss of innocence and greater vulnerability to exploitation.
Nobody's taking anyone's mental health serious.
I struggled with self-esteem issues, beauty standards, because I didn't feel accepted.
She will experience constant rejection and criticism from the public and those within the industry, which can exacerbate feelings of inadequacy and disrupt her sense of self-worth.
It made me trust people less.
I was lost.
Why do you think they would feel that way? Yes, this may psychologically stem from experiences of exploitation, isolation, and identity confusion in the entertainment industry. Betrayal or mistreatment by adults they trusted often shatters their faith in authority figures, leading to overall distrust in people.
Arrested in California, accused of driving under the influence. Former Nickelodeon star Drake Bell was convicted and sentenced for child endangerment.
You may have heard that those who are victims of that type of crime are more likely to become perpetrators of that type of crime. But ever wonder why that's psychologically sometimes the case? There are many combined factors that may cause this. There's the possibility of them internalizing that type of behavior as normal or acceptable. They learn abusive behaviors as a result of their own victimization and may lack healthy role models or appropriate guidance for forming healthy relationships and boundaries. Survivors may develop distorted beliefs about power, control, and intimacy, which can contribute to perpetuating those behaviors. And perpetuating similar acts may serve as a distorted coping mechanism to regain a sense of power and control that was lost when it happened to them. This is one of the many reasons why it's so critical for those survivors to receive adequate therapy from trained professionals.
Actor Drake Bell has been reported missing. They end up quite sick. They have issues with addiction.
Arrested? How low is the bottom?
If being a child performer is really so damaging, why are so many psychologically drawn to it? Right, the allure of being a child performer stems from the prospect of fame, fortune, and validation. Dreams and aspirations of stardom coupled with parental influence and societal glamorization of celebrity life contribute to its attraction. Children are often drawn to acting without knowing virtually any of the potential psychological risks involved, and their parents are often subconsciously psychologically seeking their own personal validation through their child. The excitement of the opportunity overshadows any concern for it negatively impacting the child's mental health. Additionally, the same hubris which causes those parents to believe that their child should be seen by millions of people is the same hubris for them to believe that the dangers of child performing won't impact their child. Those bad things happen to other children.
Not my wonderful, perfect, lucky child.
People inherently want to feel special, significant, and meaningful, and child acting and performing gets both the parent and the child to feel that way for at least a short while. So unfortunately, there won't be a shortage of child performers despite its many real dangers.
There's no business like
shit business. Now in the comments, why do you think parents sometimes pressure their children to become child actors despite the many real dangers? Let everyone know in the comments below. Subscribe for more.